So they want to secede, not declare independence, because they believe that they're maintaining the proper basis of the Union. This is exactly why they create a constitution that is verbatim, because they see no reason to change the Constitution, really. They see a reason to follow the Constitution as it was written, the way that the North has not been. And so now let me throw an additional wrinkle into it.
So they're succeeding the North.
Yeah.
They're kicking the North out.
Yeah. Basically, that's right. No, that is basically right. They're saying you Northerners are so screwy. You fail to follow the Constitution, and bye-bye. We're just saying so long, and we're going to create a confederacy based on exactly the same ideals, and we're done. Very, very interesting. Right? Now, let me throw another wrinkle into it. You had mentioned the Articles of Confederation. Well, that's critical too, because most Americans today, if you ask them what is the first form of government for the United States, they would go, oh, well, it's the Constitution. Articles of Confederation are our first form of Constitution. And the Articles are, they're created during the American Revolution. They're not fully ratified until just after the American Revolution. But the government still operates under the Articles of Confederation during the Revolution. And the Articles are notoriously weak. They create such a weak system of government. There is no chief executive. There is no judiciary. There is only a single House of Congress. There's no bicameral system. There's not a House and a Senate for that checks and balances. There's no ability to tax. Okay? And if you think about it, in what the colonists had experienced with the causes of the American Revolution, this weak system of government that's created makes all the sense in the world. Because what are they worried about? A king. Executive power. What are they worried about? Too powerful a parliament. So you create a weak Congress. What are they worried about? Too much of a taxation power. Therefore, we won't give the government taxation power. And so, you know, it all makes sense that they create this weak system of government, but then they find out that this weak system of government doesn't work at all. See what I mean? And so, when in 1786, they've gotten to the point where the government is just not working. And they meet in Annapolis, Maryland. And James Madison is in charge of all of this. And their job is to actually reform the Articles of Confederation to give a little bit of more oomph to the federal government. And Madison goes, we just wanted to get together and say hi. What we really want to do is meet in Philadelphia next year in the summer in 1787, and we want to rewrite the whole thing. And this is where the federal Constitution comes out. And like I said earlier, in order to create the new federal Constitution, the states have to give up some of their sovereignty. They have to. They have to give some power to the federal government because power can't come from nowhere. I mean, and if you think about it this way, just as, you know, I'm sure many of us are parents, at some point, as our kids have gotten older, and my kids aren't quite there yet, I'm not giving them any power. At some point, as your kids get older, in order for you to give them responsibility and some element of power and control over their own lives, you have to give up some of your own, right? It's exactly the same concept with the states and the federal government. The federal government, in order to gain some momentum and power, the states have to give it to them. Okay? So with all this background, now, the Articles of Confederation have a particularly important article in them, and it's Article 13. And I'm going to put Mike on the spot and say, Mike, what does Article 13 say?
That have to do with the consensus needed to modify or change them?
Well, yeah, it has to be unanimous.
Mm-hmm.
Any changes to the Articles of Confederation have to be unanimous. But it also says this union shall
Be perpetual.
This union shall be perpetual. Okay? Articles of Confederation plainly state this union shall be perpetual. You can't leave. Okay? All right? Now the Constitution says what? What's the preamble say? Don't sing it. I don't want any schoolhouse rocks. Okay? What does it say? We the people in order to form a more perfect union. Okay? So the new union is a more perfect union. So the big question to answer the issue of secession is this. In changing the Articles of Confederation and moving on to a new federal constitution, have they ended the old union and created a new one? Or is it an extension of the old union? See what I mean?
Well, Calhoun is going to think they've changed.
Calhoun's going to think they
I
changed.
mean, he has.
The new constitution does not say perpetuity.
Well, I'm thinking, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, when you get together and ratify them, I'm not a lawyer by any means, but I would think, isn't it a contract? In a way, you're drawing up a contract. You can't just sign a lease and say, I'm going to bail out, and if you do, your landlord's going to hit you for your security or other stuff. You can't get a car loan and sign on that and break the terms of your car loan or any other contract. It's
Very, very true. And
contractual
that is...
law is the basis of society.
No, you know what? You're dead on. You're dead on, and that's the way a lot of people look at it. They say, hey, this is a contract. You've submitted to the contract. But contracts can be ended based on the actions of the parties. Okay? And so the question then comes back, it still comes back to, can you void this contract? Can you void the federal constitution because one side has not kept their part of the bargain? That becomes the big question.
Well, okay, I'm with you on that. I guess my next question would be, okay, so if you want to get out of a contract, isn't usually you go to a court of law? That's the legal way to do it. So if you're in in the Constitution and you want to leave, the one thing you don't do is, form your convention, secede from the Union, seize federal property, fire on federal property, and skip the whole going to the Supreme Court and getting a...
Excellent conclusion. See, you are a lawyer. No, that's an excellent conclusion. And in fact, in the aftermath of the war, and I think it's White versus Texas. I think it's White versus Texas. In the aftermath of the war, 1866, the Supreme Court actually declares that no, you cannot secede. Okay? Well, guess what? You're a little late because it's already been answered by the Civil War. Okay? Well, the specific answer to how you've gotten to where you are is this. Though today we, as Americans, recognize that the final arbiter, the final decision maker on what is constitutional and what is not, is the Supreme Court. We recognize that today, right? Few would have recognized that pre-Civil War. It's a very post-Civil War concept.
But including Jackson. Did he make a comment when the Native Americans, the Cherokees, wanted? He said, "You stop me."
It's the bank.
What's
the
that?
bank. It's the bank.
Right.
It's the bank when he said that he does that.
Oh, okay. But also the Native Americans.
With the Native Americans,
Right.
well,
That
he says, now let John Marshall enforce it.
Right.
In Worcester versus Georgia in 1836, the Supreme Court says, oh, you can't do that to the Indians.
Right.
And Jackson says, well, the Supreme Court has made its decision, now let's see them enforce it.
Yeah.
We've never been able to prove that he actually made that statement.
Oh.
It sure sounds like Jackson. the better example for this is that in 1819, there's always been big debates over whether or not the Bank of the United States was constitutional. And in 1819, Jefferson believed it was unconstitutional. In 1819, in McCulloch versus Maryland, the Supreme Court says the bank is constitutional. In 1832, Jackson nullifies the bank and says in his nullification proclamation, the Supreme Court is only one branch of government. There are three branches of government. I, as chief executive, am one of those branches, and I have every bit as right to determine the constitutionality of law as does the Supreme Court. So I'm going exactly where you're thinking. Very few people in the United States, very few politicians, legislators, would have said immediately, oh, let's let the Supreme Court decide this. Okay? See what I mean? That's not what they would have concluded. And, I could go into whole issues with the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which gets into all of this, but I don't want to go there. But what's really, again, very interesting about this, and if we come back to the Articles of Confederation and think about the issue of perpetual union, in order to ratify the Articles of Confederation, every single one of the 13 states has to vote for it. It has to be unanimous. Do you remember what it has to be for the Constitution?
75%.
Isn't it 2/3? or-
9, okay.
9 out of 13. Isn't that interesting? And doesn't it put a whole other spin to it? What happens if only 9 decide to ratify? What happens to those other 4 colonies, or 4 states rather at this point? Do they get to go their own way? Do they revert back under the Articles of Confederation? It's completely unclear. Nobody can really answer the question. And this is some of the background basis that goes into Calhoun's argument, goes into Jackson's argument. Lincoln in his inaugural address, he goes, you know what? He goes, come on. No government within its founding documents plans for its own demise. You know, you don't put that into your founding document. Oh, and by the way, if you want to break up the union that we're creating, you can do it like this. And you see what I mean? So Lincoln is really, you know, he embraces Jackson's argument, and this is really then becomes key. So if you view it from Calhoun's point of view, you go, look, the perpetual union you created under the Articles of Confederation, it ended in 1789, and a new union was formed that said nothing about perpetuity. Okay? Yeah.
But one implication of accepting 9 out of 13 as deciding for everybody is the notion that in fact it's not a bunch of little states, it's a collection.
But
And that the majority.
well, see, but the problem is it doesn't actually work that way, because every single one of the states has to make their own determination about ratification.
What I'm saying is, would it be possible for someone in the north or something like that to see that setup as all of it is one group divided into 13, and the majority of the 13 can make a decision that's binding on everybody, which is what we think democracy is.
Yeah. But I don't think that it necessarily. I mean,
You don't think
somebody could make that argument. No, I don't necessarily think so. No,
No,
because
I understand. Did anybody think that way at that time, or even in the 1830s and 40s?
well, no. I think they absolutely did. I think they said this Constitution goes into effect when 9 states ratify. But that doesn't. But all of the states still ratify. So once 9 ratify, the other 4 that haven't, they still go through the ratification process. Which would then lead credence to the idea that, well, they all do have to ratify in order to be a part of the union. And they didn't. If they didn't ratify, maybe they wouldn't be a part of it. You see what I mean?
Didn't Rhode Island take another, 3 or 4 years or something?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Well, but there have always been heretics. So you see what I mean? It really gets very tricky. And now you make it, again, even more interesting. When Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address, says 77 years ago, what's he counting back to? The Declaration of Independence. He's not counting back to the Constitution. He's counting back to the Declaration of Independence. And again, he's using Jackson's logic. Because Jackson, during the Nullification Proclamation, talks about the creation of union during the American Revolution before the Constitution is ever created. And he says the nature of union comes in our fealty and our commitment to one another. And Lincoln makes the same argument. He says this union, it goes beyond, specific written law. The union goes to commitment to one another. And we showed that commitment during the American Revolutionary period.